The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Foust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfoust.com.
I ran across this story from Paris, from a photographer who was walking the streets. On Sunday morning, I was walking east on my way to the 11th arrondissement, where most of the attacks happened. Paris was eerily still, even for a Sunday, and I passed barely a dozen people on the way. Somewhere along the Rue Bergère, I saw a young woman in a hijab stop outside a boulangerie as the owner was opening for the day. She started to raise a hand in greeting. It was obvious that she knew him, but then instead she reconsidered, pulling her scarf more tightly around her face, put her head down, and started to duck past. In 2 seconds flat, the proprietor ran across the street and nearly tackled her in a bear hug, kissed her once on each cheek, and without a word sprinted back to his cafe. Sometimes broken things can be unbroken. I love that story. And when I read it, tears came right to my eyes. There's just some recognition of what's possible through healing the human heart. In these days, compassion seems in short supply, particularly if you look at politics or read anything in the media. But it's compassion that ultimately heals us. We can transcend our differences and see what we have in common. And that's the topic I'd like to explore tonight. Just to kind of break it down to 4 sections that we'll explore. One is to acknowledge where compassion starts, and to explore the practice. And it really is a practice of offering compassion for others. And while the practice of compassion is powerful, there are also some pitfalls that are pointed out in the practice. I'd like to talk about some of the shadow side of the compassion practices. And then a little bit on the practice of compassion and karma. So, where does compassion start? It's a story, it's a little while ago, but I was talking with a guy who is sort of broken through his desire to really be in a relationship. He realized that the pain of feeling isolated and lonely was not as strong, was stronger than his fear of exploring relationship, even though he had a lot of history, a lot of trepidation about dating and going out into that world. And he told me how he was heading out for a date. He did the online thing and actually found someone that looked kind of interesting. And as he was on his way to this meeting, he noticed he was really nervous. And his thoughts were just spinning. And he was thinking, I'm not really cut out for relationships. The only people I'm interested in aren't interested in me. And he just continued to fixate on all of his shortcomings. And he was spiraling down into this story of what a disaster he was in relationships. And then he just thought for a moment, he sort of woke up and realized this narrative was taking him into a really dark place. And he thought, well, wait a minute, is that true? That I really am a disaster in relationships? What if this person is a really great person? What if this is someone I'm really going to connect with? And he started to think about the traits that he really liked about himself. He had a good sense of humor. He was really sincere. He had a really strong desire to serve. He was really loyal. And he started to feel this real sense of compassion for himself and really appreciating himself. And so when he walked into the coffee shop, he was feeling really good about himself. And he thought, this may be the perfect match for me. Just feeling great. It turned out that the person he was meeting was an absolute jerk, but he felt really good about the process. Have you noticed how your mind turns against you sometimes? How it just assumes the worst possible outcome? How we're either anger waiting to happen, or rejection waiting to happen, or not belonging waiting to happen. That negative self-talk can create a truly dark place of separation. But at the same time, when you can turn kindness and compassion on yourself, it can be quite extraordinary. It can be a very deep healing salve. Just the intention. So as we explored before, just the classic phrases of compassion. May I feel happy. And may I feel safe from inner and outer harm. May I feel free from suffering. Just the intention to feel that is a very powerful form of practice and self-care. And the interesting thing is that oftentimes when we practice compassion for ourselves and for others, we fail miserably. May I feel happy? Oh, I don't feel happy at all. But what we're really intending is to increase our capacity for feeling happy, to increase our capacity to feel joy, to increase our capacity to feel safe and to feel free. It's that intention that is enormously powerful. It can move us from feeling completely cut off to the possibility of opening to what we call the immeasurables, these immeasurable states of kindness and compassion and joy and equanimity. So when you begin to practice compassion for yourself, kindness for yourself, what actually happens is you begin to notice how mean you are to yourself, how quickly you turn on yourself. And that's a very interesting part of the practice. So you actually begin to see that mechanism of shutting down much more quickly. As I like to say, you get onto yourself. You begin to see your patterns of how you turn on yourself. And of course, as I've said, perhaps ad nauseum, when you begin to practice mindfulness or non-judging awareness, you begin to see more clearly. You begin to see more clearly the patterns of how you close down, how you shut yourself down from the possibility of what life can be. You start to see it. And the practice is swimming upstream. You're swimming against your own conditioning. The interesting thing about the practice of mindfulness is that it's important to remember that this is a reality-based practice. It's about seeing what's real. There's a wonderful teaching by Sokni Rinpoche, who's a wonderful teacher. I've had the chance to sit with him, and he talks about this distinction between what feels real and what's true. When you feel you're not worthy of love, that feels real, but it's not true. When you feel you're deficient in some way, it feels real, but it's not true. So the practice is about turning your attention to what's happening right here, right now, seeing it clearly and holding it in compassion. And when you can do that for yourself, you feel more complete and you feel more whole and you have more resources, more resiliency to respond and actually create your life. And quite interestingly, as your cup begins to fill up, you become more sensitized to others. Your capacity for empathy for others continues to grow. And so you can begin to increase your capacity to offer compassion to others. There's an amazing story that Joseph Campbell tells. And this is a true story. And it was an interview with a young policeman from Wales. And he was on his beat in the Welsh countryside. He got a call in his car, and he just made it to a bridge over a mountain chasm with a river on the bottom. Hanging from the bridge was a teenager quite intent on jumping off the bridge and ending his life. And this young policeman had no time to call for backup. He leapt out of his car and hurled himself onto the bridge where the young man was hanging on by a couple of fingers. He managed to get a hold of the young man, nearly falling off the bridge many times in the process. Once he had him in his grasp, he was not able to pull him back up. So they both had to hang there, suspended over the roaring water far below until help came. When the whole thing was over, they gave the policeman a medal. It turned out he had a beautiful wife and 2 young children he loved dearly. In the interview, he was accepting the medal in front of a crowd and a television crew. "Please tell us," asked the reporter, "what was it that motivated you to risk your life for a total stranger and possibly leave your whole family husbandless and fatherless? What a brave and selfish act this was." "No," said the young policeman. "I've tried to explain this before. It wasn't courage. It wasn't self-sacrifice. It was love." "Do you mean," asked the reporter, "that you felt an overwhelming emotion and it just swept away all your fear?" "Not at all. It wasn't a feeling. That's what I realized that day. Love is not a feeling. It's a deep knowing that we are all completely interconnected." That's a radical story. So much of what happens in our life is we live in constant self-protection. We have a narrative about who we are that is constantly comparing ourselves to others. It's a natural function of the mind. It's part of the survival mode. And yet, I imagine each one of us has had those transcendent moments where we have experienced no separation from another, a sense of our interconnectedness. When someone speaks from the heart and you feel that quickening in your own heart and you recognize another's experience as your experience, that is an amazing healing moment of recognizing our interconnectedness, or as Thich Nhat Hanh describes it, interbeingness. So I thought perhaps we could practice. But first, I'd like to kind of break down the steps a little bit for compassion practice. I've often talked of how the heart practices are kind of like playing jazz. They can very easily become very rote and very mental. So the intention is to find a way that it can truly resonate for you. The idea is where you can feel it rather than just have it as a mental concept. So the one quality that I have found that fuels not only the heart practice, but any intention to be more awake in your life, that quality is sincerity. That when you call on your sincere intention to be awake, to feel your heart, there's a purity to that sincerity that transcends any technique that you do. Anywhere you are, at any time in your life, if you can call and awaken that sincerity, you've already arrived. So that's a very important quality. The other thing to remember is that when you're practicing non-judging awareness, and when you're practicing compassion, I like the analogy of them as they're little sprouts, they're little seedlings. And they actually require some protection. Because it's so easy to slip away from that delicate practice of non-judging awareness and the intention to open your heart. So to recognize that in much of the practice you may not actually be there, but to come back to the sincere intent to be in the moment without judgment and to sense the possibility of compassion. It's helpful to get comfortable, to settle yourself in. I often find, just as we did in this meditation of the body scan, is a wonderful way to both relax and also get concentrated. And when you practice compassion for others, a very helpful way to begin is to think of someone you know personally who has experienced some misfortune. You start with those with whom you feel the most empathy. Someone who's experienced some loss, some anxiety, sickness, old age, death. It's best to start with those you feel the most sincere connection to, because that will have the quality of aliveness and will elicit the most empathy. And the practice is to, as you reflect on one or a few people, wherever your awareness goes, is to, from a sincere place, to wish them freedom from sorrow, to wish them a happier and healthy and a successful present and future. If you find yourself slipping away from that intent, just notice that. Quite often, offering compassion for someone who's been suffering can bring up other feelings. There can be feelings of judgment, there can be feelings of resentment, there can be feelings of sadness. A myriad of emotions can arise as part of the practice. And if you find yourself just sort of slipping off and getting lost in some narrative, then you can practice compassion for yourself, just to hold that with some kindness and some empathy. It's helpful to stay present to the senses, so you don't get lost in thought, but stay with the breath, stay in your body. As you find yourself getting more concentrated and getting more steady in your practice, you can allow that practice to expand. You can include others, to wish them well, to wish them happiness and success. Eventually, you can actually begin to include those who have done harm in the world. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And just to recognize that the practice is to elicit compassion, but it's very much like you're pouring in fresh water, which will push toxins to the surface. So there may be stories, narratives, other emotions that arise, to trust that's part of the practice. So why don't we'll take a few minutes for practice. So you might like to close your eyes. And you might bring your attention to the breath. Let your breath slow down. Let your breath be smooth, relaxed. You might soften, relax the forehead, the tongue, the lips. Soften the belly. Feel the palms of the hands. And in your own way, just take a moment to reflect on your sincere intention, to hold yourself and others in non-judging awareness, to expand your capacity for compassion and for kindness. Take a few moments to feel the breath, to acknowledge the sounds around you. And over these minutes, I'll offer just a few suggestions, allowing you to explore on your own. You might bring into mind just someone in particular, someone you know who has experienced some misfortune, some loss, might feel anxious. And in your own way, over this next minute or two, wish them freedom from sorrow, a happier and healthy and successful present and future. You might offer the phrases, may you feel happy, may you feel safe from inner and outer harm, may you feel free from suffering. And over the next minute, let yourself continue, coming back to your intent, to your sincerity. If your mind wanders or you get hijacked by a story or an emotion, come back to this sincere intention, wishing well. You might include others, let your awareness flow freely, wishing for happiness, safety, freedom. With this next minute or so, you might bring into mind, only if it feels safe, someone you may know or someone you sense who has done harm in this world, and explore what it's like to wish this person or these people happiness, safety, and freedom from suffering. And you might close this practice by offering this sense of compassion to yourself. Just to feel your intent to increase and expand your capacity for happiness and for joy, for kindness and compassion. And then now you might deepen your breath. And just sense what may have shifted, what you observed through this practice. And whenever you're ready, you can let your eyes open, or feel free to remain with them closed. I find quite often this practice can be very healing, and it can also be a cathartic practice at times. Quite often when I'm asked to facilitate some friction between people, a couple, I'll usually ask, are you practicing compassion for each other? And usually it's the last thing they ever thought of. Because again, we're guarded against, we don't want to necessarily feel what's under there. As Tara says, if you truly offered someone compassion who has harmed you, what would you have to feel? What's underneath that? In my experience in practicing compassion, when it is sincere, when I can truly wish another person well, my ego has disappeared. There's no I or mine. There's just a resonance of pure connection. But a lot of times that's not there. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the shadow side of compassion practice, because it can be really quite nefarious. Just the subtle ways the ego kind of slips in there. The intention, of course, is to explore how in the heart there is no sense of I or mine. There's just a sense of pure presence. That's what's possible. But as I thought about this, it reminded me back when I lived in the ashram, we had this monthly newsletter that went out and there was a little column called Hero Stories, where the person would write up the story of someone who did something really selfless, And they're kind of inspiring stories. But after 3 or 4 months, a number of us were talking, and a number of people started confessing that they were doing selfless acts in public, so they might be seen and written up in the next issue. That's how sneaky the ego is. And the curious thing is that when we do acts of generosity, when we do acts of compassion, they feel good. Because we experience that sense of selflessness. There's almost a rush that occurs. So there's almost a very subtle sort of ego selfing, if I can use that verb, that we do compassion practices because they feel good. And we want that feeling of feeling good. So that very subtle little way the ego comes in. Perhaps what I find the near enemy of compassion is pity. And it can be very easy to notice when you're practicing compassion for someone that you're holding yourself above them. Again, very, very subtle, but it just it can sneak its way in there. A sense of being better than the other. Seeing the other person as lesser, from a superior place of offering compassion. Just to notice if that might enter in. Sometimes the compassion practice can feel like an obligation. And again, that's going to take away from the sincere, pure practice itself. And then, of course, we judge ourselves for feeling obligated to offer compassion. So that's its own spiral. Sometimes when we offer compassion to another, there can be a sense of overwhelm, like it's just too much. I can't take it. And there's a very interesting study that's been done that has demonstrated something that is referred to as compassion fatigue. And that is, you can only take so much. And it's very important to recognize that, the sense of, oh, I should be more compassionate, when you've had it. You don't have the energy, you don't have the resources, you don't have the resiliency to keep your heart open. It's an important thing to recognize in compassion practice, how quickly we get overwhelmed. I had mentioned this a number of months back, but if you've ever noticed that when you get a solicitation to feed the hungry children somewhere, how it's usually one child? Because what they've noticed is that if you have 50 starving children on the envelope, it's too much. The heart just shuts down. One you can handle, maybe two the mind can handle, but then we get overwhelmed. So again, to notice if it feels like it's too much, just to notice when the heart naturally begins to shut down. Sometimes there's a subtle mechanism where we might offer compassion as a way to gain merit for ourselves. So I'll just do compassion practice, and somehow I'm gonna get some good karma points out of this. And again, it's a subtle mechanism of the ego that takes you away from the pure experience of compassion, which is being with another. The other element that can occur is that sometimes compassion can get linked to anger, particularly when you're practicing compassion for someone who has done you harm. It can quite easily trigger that. So just to be aware of these when you do compassion practice, to notice if there's some subtle element of being better than, feeling superior to the other, to notice if there's some sense of obligation about it, which will interfere with the purity of it. At times you may feel overwhelmed. It's just too much. It's impossible to do it. Or to notice if it might be connected with anger. I think the most important thing in the practice of compassion is to recognize that it's a very high form of practice. Love is a very high vibration of practice. So when you aim for love, when you're aiming for a sense of interconnectedness, it's very easy to miss. It's very easy to feel, I can't do it, or I'm trying too hard, or I'm not trying hard enough, or I'm not a loving person. And I love that 2-word mantra, keep going. Just come back to the sincerity and begin again, just as we do in mindfulness practice. So there's a story which I believe I read before. Once there were 2 brothers who inherited their father's land. The brothers divided the land in half, and each one farmed his own section. Over time, the older brother married and had 6 children, while the younger brother never married. One night, the younger brother lay awake. It's not fair that each of us has half the land to farm, he thought. My brother has 6 children to feed, and I don't have any. He should have more grain than I do. So that night, the younger brother went to his silo, gathered a large bundle of wheat, climbed the hill that separated the 2 farms and over to his brother's farm, and leaving the wheat in his brother's silo, the younger brother returned home, feeling pleased with himself. Earlier that very same night, the older brother was also lying awake. It's not fair that each of us has half the farm. In my old age, my wife and I will have our grown children to take care of us, not to mention grandchildren, while my brother will probably have none. He should at least sell more grain from the fields now so he can provide for himself in his old age with dignity. So that night, too, he secretly gathered up a large bundle of the wheat, climbed the hill, left it in his brother's silo, and returned home, feeling pleased. The next morning, the younger brother was surprised to see the amount of grain in his barn had unchanged. I must not have taken as much wheat as I thought, he said. Tonight, I'll be sure to take more. That very same moment, his older brother was also standing in his barn, musing very much the same thoughts. After night fell, each brother gathered a greater amount of wheat from his barn, and in the dark secretly delivered it to his brother's barn. The next morning, the brothers were again puzzled. How could I be mistaken? There's the same amount of grain here as there was before I cleared the pile for my brother. This is impossible. Tonight, I'll make no mistake. I'll take my pile down to the very floor, and that way I'll be sure the grain gets delivered to my brother. The third night, more determined than ever, each brother gathered a large pile of wheat from his barn, loaded onto a cart, slowly pulled his haul through the fields and up the hill to his brother's barn. And at the top of the hill, under the shadow of a moon, each brother noticed a figure in the distance. Who could that be? When the two brothers recognized the form of the other brother and the load he was pulling behind, they realized what had happened. Without a word, they dropped the ropes to their cart and embraced. When I hear that story, I just ask myself, how more generous could I be? With all the harm being done in the world, there's always the question of how can we offer compassion to those who have done harm? And there's so much to talk about, but when we talk about karma and compassion, the understanding of karma is that every action has an equal reaction. What you sow, you reap. So that those who act out of kindness beget kindness. Those who act out of cruelty beget cruelty. So those who create harm eventually meet those actions in their life. And as I've read of those who are often pulled into violent acts, and we look closely at their lives, there's usually tremendous suffering. In many cases, tremendous poverty, tremendous lack, no options. And remembering that if someone feels happy, a happy person doesn't harm. When someone feels safe from inner and outer harm, the heart naturally opens. When someone feels free from suffering, there is a natural state of presence which begets generosity and kindness. So to offer compassion for those who have done harm is a radical act, one that can dramatically shift not only our life and how we hold others, but possibly it changes the consciousness in which we live. So this is a heart training. It's about training your heart to be more sensitive, to be more responsive to that which is between you and feeling free and to those around you who are suffering. So perhaps we can close with a short meditation and then a short reading. As you again feel the breath, and as you just sense the aliveness of the breath flowing in and out, the vibration of sound. You might sense in your own way the immeasurable qualities of the heart, your capacity for kindness, for joy, for compassion for yourself and for all beings. And just sensing the capacity of your heart unleashed, reflecting on these words from Muhammad. What actions are most excellent? To gladden the heart of a human being, to feed the hungry, to help the afflicted, to lighten the sorrow of the sorrowful, to remove the wrongs of the injured. That person is the most beloved, who does most good to other creatures. As you reflect on those that you will be spending some time with over these holidays, you might imagine broadcasting out in front of you a well-wishing, wishing yourself and these beings ease and happiness, peace and freedom. Letting that radiate out in all directions to all beings. When you're ready, you can deepen the breath. And as you're ready, you can let your eyes open. Thank you for your kind and compassionate listening. Training the heart requires attention and fuel. That's why we have cookies. Next week, there will be no childcare. I'll send a little reminder. As always, if you'd like to be on the mailing list, you can sign up in the back. Thank you for your support for the church and for me and my lavish lifestyle. Enjoy your evening. May you and your compassion have a wonderful evening and beyond. Thank you.